Thank you very much, Jason. That was an excellent outline of one of potentially catastrophic complications. I think this has happened to air embolism has happened to all of us. And I'm just curious, maybe Jader can give us his thoughts on what you do if something like this should happen.
Hi, Manus. No, that was a great presentation by Jason. I mean, I would really echo what he said. I think probably the first step is to go 100% oxygen and try to understand the magnitude and the severity of the event. I think if they're substantial, sometimes even using the aspiration catheter can sometimes help as well. And time. I think I have sometimes used adenosine, but I think aspiration and 100% oxygen would be my first steps.
Perfect. Jay, any thoughts? I know you do a lot of complexity or trapping is every day. Has it happened to you, air embolism from trapping and just forgetting to back bleed the guide?
Yeah, bubbles happen, unfortunately. That's just part of the challenge of having multiple catheters and balloons in a guide catheter at the same time. It just simply tends to entrain air, and if you're busy doing multiple steps, you can make a mistake every now and then. That happens. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that this air embolus event can cause really pretty profound ischemia. And often what we found is just taking a stop from the coronaries and unloading their ventricle either with a balloon pump or an impella, and then clearing out the air just to get the patient stabilized. Because we actually had an event go down in LAD where the patient became very, very shocky, and we had to resuscitate the patient on the table. And without mechanical circulatory support, I don't know that patient would have done very well.
Manus?
Yeah, Bill.
So one thing that didn't get brought up that I think people miss out on, actually one of the best treatments for air embolus is intracoronary epinephrine. So epinephrine is a coronary vasodilator. And so, whatever. So it's an intracoronary vasodilator. And so I think people forget to do that. So what you do is if the patient's in full arrest, you just give a milligram down the guide. If they're just getting shocky and sick, you can basically dilute it off on the edge of the table and give anywhere between 10 and 100 micrograms down the guide. But by giving it down the guide, you're giving it directly to the place that needs it instead of giving it in a vein that takes time. And it's a coronary vasodilator, and it makes people tachycardic. So I would just, for everybody out there, no reflow and air embolus, intracoronary epi is actually a great solution and a way to manage these events. So don't forget that. And unlike all the other vasodilators, it actually makes people hypertensive, which in this situation, they can allow you to potentially use other vasodilators.
Perfect. Yeah.
The other thing you can actually, so I use that before intracoronary adrenaline, epinephrine is really good, but I also, not norepinephrine, epinephrine, but I also kind of flush, like after you aspirate, I flush with saline, I flush with copious amount of saline, and hopefully that will push it through and move the bubbles in the microcirculation. And I use that technique a few times, but I echo Jay comment that if it's an LAD, a lot of times the patient will suffer because it's a global ischemia and about 40% of the myocardium all of a sudden, and you need to have access to really good mechanical circulatory support and be able to deploy it really fast.
Great. Another thing I could...
Yeah, the worst embolisms that I have seen, and that didn't happen in my lab, but I've seen as legal cases, is doing ventriculograms. People are not really careful, and sometimes there are bubbles or significant bubbles, and just people get sloppy. And then massive embolism in the ventricle with embolism to the coronaries and fatal outcomes. Just to keep in mind that always be very careful and never be sloppy with every single step you take in the cath lab.
Absolutely. And another thing that I personally like to do is give 100% oxygen. So if I suspect air embolism, I just give 100% oxygen for a few minutes. That might help with resolution of that air. But maybe talk a little bit about thrombus. Maybe you can ask Lorenzo your thoughts about what's your preferred thrombectomy mode, the specific catheter you like, or penumbra, or any other thoughts for how to manage thrombus?
So Manos, thank you for your question. So usually we traditionally have had access to conventional thrombectomy catheters, such as Pronto LP, for example. This is widely available, But recently, we also have the option of using more refined devices such as penumbra, as you pointed out. This for sure provides excellent suction capability. So whenever there is a huge thrombus burden and there is availability in the particular cath lab, penumbra is also a good option. If in the meantime, if you don't have a thrombectomy catheter available, while the techs and nurses get it to you, you can, if you have a guide catheter extension, you can go down with that and try to suction through the guide catheter extension. So that's another option. And for sure, all the pharmacology plays a major role as well, also in the next few hours after the acute event.
Perfect. Any other thoughts from anyone regarding thrombus and air? I see Dan. I think, Dan, you're a little muted. There you go.
Sorry, just not to forget about the pharmacology, right? So most of the thrombus we see is often when we're inadequately anticoagulated or haven't used a 2B3A inhibitor in an ACS setting. Don't forget the importance of that. And often, as you're doing it, if you've given additional heparin, the thrombus will start to resolve. So just not to forget the pharmacology there.